Dear friends, I'm not going to speak today about the gospel, but rather on the second reading, early on from the letter of Philippians, Paul's letter to the Philippians, and the particular struggle that Paul seems to be having here with the decision that he needs to make. He feels that he needs to decide whether it is better for him to go home to God or to stay and labor more for the gospel. The situation is that at this point, Paul is in Ephesus, where he stayed for 3 years. He was very successful there in terms of being able to win many converts to the faith, to Jesus. But he made also enemies because of his success. So the pagans resented him because he was taking some of their devotees away from the goddess Artemis, who was very popular. She was like the queen goddess in Ephesus, and great devotion to her. That's why eventually Mary was declared Mother of God at the Council of Ephesus. That's in parenthesis, okay? But also the Jews. The Jews were very powerful in the sense that they were an approved religion under Roman law. Romans respected antiquity, and the Jews went way back, so they had a certain respect given to them. What happened was when those early Christians who thought of themselves as Jews, as being, even though they were Gentiles, had come into the faith, but they were building on the Jewish heritage, nonetheless, in the eyes of the Roman law, they were not part of the Jewish people and therefore did not have the same privileges that the Jews had of religious freedom. So somehow, we're not told how, Paul, at the connivance of his enemies there in Ephesus, was put into prison. Now, we don't know what prison meant. It might have been the equivalent of a house arrest. But he was going to be brought to the tribunal, and he could have been condemned to death. That was his situation when he was writing this letter to the Philippians. And he had been in this situation for a little while. We don't know how long. But he made reference to it in his second letter to the Corinthians, which was written after Philippians. Looking back, he said, "It was terrible. I was in great anguish." And I'm quoting here, "We felt as if we had received a sentence of death. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead." So he was able to see many good things coming out of his imprisonment, namely that people were talking about, well, who is this Paul? Why is he in prison? And therefore, they had to explain, well, because he believes in Jesus and he proclaims he is the Lord. And okay, well, then he said, that's the way the gospel is being proclaimed. So good things are happening because I'm in prison. And then also, he was very pleased with the fact that the people in Ephesus had taken up the slack, so to speak. Since he was in prison, they made an extra effort to go out and preach about Jesus. So he saw all this happening and he realized, okay, in God's plan, this is doing good. But he knew he might be put to death. And so he was in this situation. He talks as if he's got a choice here. I mean, he really didn't, but he did have a choice as to what his attitude would be. And that's important because that's the kind of choice we have too. Sometimes we don't have a choice as to whether we're going to live or die, but we need to have the right attitude. So he was saying to himself, it's almost like he's talking to himself, for me, life is Christ. That's all there is to it, and death is gain. So if my death means I go home to God, that's okay. I do not know which I should choose. I am caught between the two. I long to depart this life and to be with Christ, for that is far better. It's surprising that the Christian scriptures don't speak as much as we would like about what happens to us after we die. We have lots of questions, and it's all kind of vague. Why? Well, because at first they were convinced that Jesus was coming very soon and take everybody into glory with him. It seemed to them the resurrection for the early Christians was the sign of the inbreaking of the new age, the kingdom. God was renewing the world, and it's obvious Jesus went back. He went to the Father, but that's only going to be for a little while. He said he would come again, so they just figured it's going to happen very soon, which explains some of the attitudes they had toward things. Paul talking as if, don't get yourself enmeshed in the world because it's not going to last long anyway. Gradually, as time went on, they realized that God maybe has another plan here. We have to reconfigure what our thinking is. And so Paul is at that point right now. He's coming to the conclusion that if he dies, he's not going to be there for the parousia, for the glorious coming of Christ. That's what he's been waiting for. He's going to be one of those people who goes on ahead. But he's kind of come to terms with that, because if he leaves this world, he's going to be, all it says is, I shall be with Christ. And that was enough for him, just to know that he was there. I guess my question is, when I read this, how does that strike us in our heart of hearts? Is it enough for you to say, oh, I'm ready to die and be with Christ? Are you? Are you ready to die? That's a big question, isn't it? What is our inner attitude towards our own death? It's not a simple question, and it's not a simple answer. Why would we not want to die and be with Christ? Well, we might think, I'm not worthy yet. My life I got other things I think the Lord wants me to do. The closer death comes, the more people think, I needed to do this, or I needed to do that. And we all realize that we are imperfect and we aren't measuring up. I'm surprised sometimes, remember as a young priest, getting to know some older people my age now, but they were old at that time, and they were exemplary Christians. I mean, from the outside, they had been very devout. And yet, talking with them, sometimes you would find they had a fear of death. And I couldn't quite understand that, because as a young person, I don't think I had that. And but I guess it comes with age, realizing all that, not only what one has done for God, but one has failed to do for God and the kingdom. So one way of looking at this is that we have the doctrine of purgatory. And that should be a very consoling doctrine for all of us. Because all that says is that when we die, the transition into the presence of God will be gradual. It's not going to be so overwhelming. No, it will be that God, we'll know that we are with God, but that knowledge will bring with it a certain pain. Why? Because we will then see for the first time our life as God sees it. It'll be a cause for rejoicing, satisfaction, but also of pain. Oh, I should have responded this way. So it's purification in that sense. We're becoming whole. We can't change our life. It's finished, it's done. But as we look at it in the light of God's grace, we see that we need to be purified by the grace of God of those attachments or those imperfections that were part of our earthly life. So if we are hesitant to go to God because we know we aren't finished yet, one way or the other, God hasn't finished it, well, God has promised us that he will take care of. There's a lot to look forward to in terms of dying, not only that we're going to be with Christ, but that we're going to be with so many other wonderful people who have loved Christ, the saints, in the broadest sense of the word, the holy ones of God, who have already passed on to heaven and already are purified. And we get to know them in a way that we never could have known them. Even our loved ones here on earth, we will come to know our spouse or our parent or whatever. We see their whole life in God's eyes and how their life affected others. Someone has put it very beautifully. When we die, we're going to have three things to do. We come to know ourselves as God knows us. Come to know every other person we're going to spend eternity with as God knows them. And thirdly, to know God as God is, the mystery of the Trinity. And all of that. So heaven is not going to be boring. We're going to have a role to play. We're going to have a job, in quotes, to do, but it'll be a joyous one. It'll be one of great fulfillment. And so we should try to focus on those positive things as much as we are able. Dear friends, you know that I am in the position of having to say, well, all of this could come true for me very soon. Soon and very soon, I'm going to see the Lord. So I hope that all of you who are out there listening can kind of play back. Oh, dear, dear, dear. I hope that I'm not like that someday when crying out, no, 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 no. To say to the Lord, when the time comes, Lord, your will. That's all that we can do, is if we have the chance, God willing, to say yes to our death. I'd like to just close with what Paul says a few lines later in Philippians, where he says this, even if I am to be poured out, so he's saying there's a possibility that I'm going to be put to death. Even if I am to be poured out as a libation, that's the way, one of the sacrifices that were made in the temple, to take the water and to pour it out on the altar as a symbol of pouring one's life out in sacrifice. Even if I am to be poured out as a libation upon the sacrificial offering of your faith, I am glad and rejoice with you all. So it's a beautiful idea that when our time comes, we don't get dragged into heaven kicking and screaming like that little child, but joyfully go where the Lord leads us to be with him forever. Amen, amen. God bless.